Welcome back to talkSPORT USA, your dedicated NFL YouTube channel with myself, Will Varney. And look, we're out in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's game day. Chargers taking on the Chiefs tonight, live at Arena Corinthians. We're going to be on talkSPORT 2 from 1 a.m. for the game. But it's an absolute pleasure to say I'm joined by a man who can give me some insight into the Los Angeles Chargers, a man who knows this team very well indeed. Mr. Daniel Popper from The Athletic joins us. Daniel, how are you, my man?
Doing great. Happy to be here, Will. Thanks for having me.
Look, really appreciate your time. I wanted to start by just talking about the overall vibes of this team heading into the season, because 11-win season last year, but it ends quite comprehensively in that playoff wildcard defeat. What are the feelings amongst the team, the organization, heading into this new campaign?
Yeah, I think there was quite a bit of momentum heading into training camp. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh comes in, turns the organization around, really resets the culture of the team, and really has these players playing hard and bought in as they make the playoffs last year. I think that momentum slowed a little bit, and the wind in the sails got taken out a little bit when left tackle Rashawn Slater suffered a season-ending knee injury in training camp. He's probably one of their 5 best players, and he's now out for the entire year. It was only a week after he signed a market-setting contract extension, over $100 million for Rashawn Slater. A week later, he tears his patellar tendon. And so I think the last 4 weeks or so have sort of been the team trying to regroup after losing one of their best players, and we're going to find out exactly what it looks like tonight in Sao Paulo. You have Joe Alt, their first-round pick from last year, moving from right tackle to left tackle. Trey Pipkins, an experienced player, but not quite as good of a player as Rashawn Slater, is sliding in at right tackle. And so I think there was a lot of excitement around the team, but that was dampened to a degree when they lost one of their best players during a training camp practice.
I'll touch on Rashawn in a moment, because I think it's a really interesting discussion to have about the offensive line right now. But I just wanted to ask you, going into this offseason, there's been a bit of discussion, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it, regarding whether this team should have been more aggressive in free agency, in terms of the moves they made. Could they have gone out and got a real star to really take this team on to the next level in what is a really competitive division? Joe Ortiz, they ended up going for almost like smaller deals, short term. Do you think that was the right approach when you assess that right now, or do we have to wait for the season to begin and then we'll figure out whether that was really the right movement going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Like, I've done a lot of analysis of free agency, and there are a lot of cautionary tales in terms of spending a lot of money on players, and that money doesn't give you the return when that player sort of flames out or doesn't perform at the level. So I think, like, you can sort of have to look at it as, you know, the strategy of the team. And the strategy of the team with Joe Ortiz coming from the Baltimore Ravens is to build through the draft and supplement the roster with players who outperform their contracts. They don't want to be in a situation where they pay big money for a player on the open market and that player fails to live up to the contract. And so they were sort of hunting for these value deals. They had the cap space and they had the money to spend more in free agency, but I think they were worried about those cautionary tales and potentially spending on players who didn't live up to the contract. So there were spots where they could have spent more. Like, to me, we were just talking about the offensive line. They absolutely could have spent on offensive guards, on a center. You look at what the Vikings did, for example, signing Will Fries to a big deal, guard from the Indianapolis Colts. They signed Ryan Kelly to a pretty sizable deal, a center. The Chargers had needs at all of those spots. They end up coming back with the same starter at left guard in Zion Johnson, the same starter at center in Bradley Bozeman. They spent a little bit on Mekhi Becton, but even he was a cheaper player because of knee issues that he's had in his career, only $6 million guaranteed in that contract. So I think there's absolutely an argument to be made that the Chargers could have spent more at some of these areas of weakness, but I think it goes back to the philosophy that Joe Ortiz developed over his 26 years with the Baltimore Ravens, a team that really firmly believes in building through the draft and then supplementing with players in free agency who can live up to or outperform their contracts.
Well, let's talk about this offensive line then, because it's interesting. You mentioned there Rashawn Slater's given this big contract extension and then goes down with this season-ending injury, and it feels like there is this real dampening of the mood at that moment within the organization, outside looking in. And then we've seen throughout training camp, there was this experiment with Zion Johnson at center and how that really plays out with Bradley Bozeman. That's really not come to fruition. That's not played out. And now we have a situation where Joe Alt moves back over to left tackle that he played at college. Trey Pipkins comes in at right tackle. How are you feeling about this offensive line right now? Does it worry you in a way, considering like you say, this was a step that this offensive line could have taken compared to last year, and really feels like they're at maybe a similar level to what they were.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll start with the positives, right? They're probably the only team in the league that can replace an all-pro left tackle with another all-pro player in Joe Alt. There's very few teams that have the type of tackles that the Chargers have. And so it could be worse. You could lose an all-pro tackle and be replacing your left tackle with a replacement level player or something worse. They have Joe Alt, who they drafted in the first round last year. He was a college left tackle. He goes back to his original position, and you feel like, okay, you can sustain your all-pro level play at left tackle. Now, Trey Pipkins is a functional player. He's played almost 3,000 snaps at right tackle in his career. You feel okay about him there. But part of the strategy and the philosophy and the identity of this offense was going to be built through these tackles, okay? Yeah. You had the best tackle duo in the league, and as a result, you felt like the interior was going to be better because you had this great duo on the edges that you felt like could play on an island and defend against some of these edge rushers. Now you don't have that anymore. And so I worry about the interior. I think it was the biggest weakness on the team last year. They had a lot of difficulty, particularly in pass protection, picking up stunts and blitzes, identification, all of that kind of stuff. And they're bringing back two of the same starters. Now, the big question is, how much of an impact does Mekhi Becton make? Obviously, he won a Super Bowl last year with the Eagles, kind of resurrected his career. He's a better run blocker than he is as a pass protector. But the Chargers view it as this guy is going to elevate Bradley Bozeman and Zion Johnson, who were a part of the problem last year. That's the question that we're going to really answer tonight in this Chiefs game, because Steve Spagnuolo, the Chiefs defensive coordinator, is known as a blitzer, as a schemer of stunts in games. The Chiefs were 5th in blitz rate last year, according to True Media. That's basically the case every year with the Steve Spagnuolo defense. So, and you got to mention Chris Jones too, one of the best defensive tackles and interior rushers in the game. So tonight we're going to find out right away. Is this strategy going to work? Is the approach going to work? Is Mekhi Becton actually going to raise the level of play of Zion Johnson and Bradley Bozeman, the holdovers from last year? Or is this going to be the same thing as last year, which everybody saw in that Houston Texans game where Justin Herbert was under siege and could not do anything because of the failure of the pass protection and the amount of pressure? So to answer your question, yeah, I'm worried, and I don't think they did enough, and I think they could have done more between free agency and the draft. And ultimately, if there's a reason why this doesn't go as planned and they don't reach the level that they want to, I think it's going to start with the interior of the offensive line and some of the things that they did not do.
Yeah, and you said this team's going to build through the tackles, right? And when you lose Rashawn Slater, I wonder if it changes that philosophy that it felt like coming into the season with Greg Roman, that they're going to run the ball. You draft Amarian Hampton 22nd overall, so how that impact. Speaking of Amarian Hampton, what have you seen from him going through OTA's training camp? What have you heard from other players speaking about this guy? Because it feels like there is this real excitement about what he can bring to the league.
So his college tape is phenomenal, and he's a complete running back. And so you start with what he can do with the ball in his hands on handoffs. He's got long speed. He's super physical. The one thing that we haven't been able to see consistently yet, because he just hasn't played in games, is his ability to finish. I mean, he runs through people at the end of runs. And so I think for them, what they didn't do on the offensive line, I think they hope gets offset by a guy that can really, really run the football. And I think there are big things ahead for Omarion Hampton. I think the big question is, can they block for him?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that they signed Najee Harris in free agency, who more of a doubles hitter, to use a baseball analogy, like he's going to get what's blocked for him. The Chargers finished 17th in yards over expectation last year, according to Next Gen Stats, so kind of a middle of the pack. If they can be a team that maybe gets more than what's blocked for them with Omarion Hampton, then you could potentially see some improvement in that area. Mekhi Becton, as I mentioned earlier, is really a solid run blocker. But that's a big part of, is this going to work? Greg Roman, as you mentioned, has made an entire career out of scheming up running games. And last year, it just never really came together. Some of that was the lack of talent at running backs. Yeah. Some of that was the blocking in front of them. But I think you sort of have to talk about the offense as a whole. Football, a lot of the time, is all of these related pieces that affect everything. And they invested a lot in the pass catchers this year. They drafted 2 receivers. They brought Keenan Allen back. They signed Tyler Conklin, a pass-catching tight end. They drafted Oronde Gadsden, a pass-catching tight end, in the draft. And so if they have more options in the passing game, does that force defenses to protect against the pass, devote more resources to pass defense, and open up the box a little bit to run a little bit more? My feeling is they're going to be better at running the football because I believe in Omarion Hampton. and what he can bring. How much better? I think that's really the big question that we need to answer here as the Chargers head into the season.
You mentioned some of these rookie pass catchers who've come in, Trey Harris, Keandre Lambert-Smith, Ronnie Gadsden. I wanted to ask you about those rookies, but particularly at the receiver position in terms of Smith and in terms of Harris, because it feels like right now, in terms of the roles and how they shake out, you mentioned Keenan Allen comes back. He's somebody who knows this organization in and out. Where's the role here for Quentin Johnston amongst all of this? Because I've been really impressed from what I've seen from Lambert-Smith through preseason, what he showed in the Hall of Fame game against the Rams, especially in preseason as well. Is he somebody who's actually looking to displace Quentin Johnston, or is Quentin Johnston right now still wide receiver 3, would you say, in this team?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, obviously, with the receiver room, it starts with Ladd McConkey, who had an excellent rookie season last year, and he's wide receiver 1.
Yeah.
And last year, he played the majority of his snaps in the slot, and I think that's where they want to play him because I think that's where he's at his best. So the big question is, okay, how do you fill the spots on the outside around Ladd McConkey to create some more opportunities for him? You go back to that Houston game last year. Ladd McConkey had 197 yards receiving. It was an unbelievable performance. All of the other receivers combined in that game had 14 yards receiving. Yeah. So they felt like heading into this offseason, they had to do something on the interior of the offensive line, and they had to get some more options around Ladd McConkey. Now, they signed Mike Williams in free agency, another familiar face. He retired on the eve of training camp. He was a guy that was going to play on the outside, play that X position, be a guy that could attack down the field, win in contested catch situations. And so that was part one of the process, and then they drafted these 2 receivers in Keandre Lambert-Smith and Trey Harris to try and have different options on the outside to complement Ladd McConkey. Now, Quentin Johnston is a part of that calculus and a part of that combination. And I think they signed Mike Williams to try and make Quentin Johnston more of wide receiver 4, maybe force him to, earn his reps in a way that he didn't have to last year. After Mike Williams leaves, now Quentin Johnston moves into more of a starting role like he had last season. He's really their X receiver. He's that guy on the outside, isolated, that is going to be throwing the ball in a lot of contested catch situations. So to me, he's a starter right now. Now, they signed Keenan Allen after Mike Williams retired to get sort of that veteran presence in the room because they had all of these young guys. So to start out, I think it's going to be Ladd McConkey in the slot, and then Quentin Johnston at X as a starter, and then Keenan Allen on the outside on the other side next to Ladd McConkey as the Z receiver, and then the rookies, Keandre Lambert-Smith and Trey Harris, are going to be fighting for snaps. Now, if I had to project it out over the course of the season, I think that one of these rookies overtakes Quentin Johnston, and when you're in 11 personnel with 3 receivers, by the end of the season, it's going to be Ladd in the slot, Keenan at Z, and then one of these receivers that they drafted at the X. The question is, which one is it going to be? Because both of them, as you mentioned, have performed well in the preseason. I think Trey Harris is a guy that they drafted in the second round and really believe can be that type of star player. But to me, Keandre Lambert-Smith has been the better receiver between the two. And I go back to that Saints game in the preseason where they played the starters. And Quentin Johnston had that concussion, scary play, got hit hard, stretcher came out, he ended up walking off the field. It was Keandre Lambert-Smith who came onto the field with the starters and not Trey Harris. And to me, that was an indication that he's ahead of Trey Harris in the depth chart right now. But I feel like those 2 guys are going to be fighting for snaps at that X position, with Quentin Johnston over the course of the season.
You mentioned there about the Keenan Allen coming in, and I think I read a piece of yours recently, or I might have heard you on a podcast talking about the impact that Keenan Allen has had on Ladd McConkey. What we saw from Ladd McConkey breaking records last year as a rookie was just phenomenal, especially, like you mentioned, the amount of pressure that's on his shoulders, because really he is the focal point last season, especially of that offense. Comes in from Georgia and has the performances that he does. I just wanted to ask you, that relationship between Keenan and between Ladd, what is that like, and how do you think that can take Ladd to the next level this season in his second year in the league?
Yeah, I mean, so the funny part of it is, and I covered Keenan for 6 years before he left, there's so many similarities in their games, which is really interesting. Keenan's a bigger player than Ladd, but the route running is very similar. Just their deception at the top of routes, the way they cut off, their ability on option routes out of the slot to have a 2-way go to either cut outside or inside. And so I used to watch Ladd McConkey, in person at training camp and on film, and I'd be like, man, there's some Keenan Allen there. There's some Keenan Allen there in terms of how he plays. So it's great that Keenan has now come in. Ladd McConkey told us earlier this offseason that even before Keenan was back with the Chargers, he used to go back into his tablet and watch practice reps of Keenan Allen because the Chargers have a database going back to, 5, 10, 15 years ago of all of this practice tape. And he used to sit there by himself and he used to watch routes that Keenan Allen ran because he saw some of himself in Keenan Allen. And Keenan Allen is, your favorite receiver's favorite receiver. That's the best way to describe him. Everybody in the league watches Keenan Allen because he's one of the greatest route runners of his generation. So now, instead of having to go into the tablet and watch Keenan Allen reps and try and determine what he was doing based off the film, he has him right next to him. And he can ask him questions about, what'd you do here? How did you run this option route? On this slant, how did you, contort your body to set up this, defensive back? How are you seeing this leverage? How do you play against this cover 3 look, et cetera, et cetera? I think it's going to do wonders for Ladd McConkey. He was amazing last year. I think he's going to be even better this year. And Keenan Allen has already been a huge influence on Ladd McConkey in the tablet. Now he's an influence in person. You go out to practice. I mean, Ladd McConkey is in Keenan Allen's pocket the entire time, constantly asking questions, constantly talking to him. And that just shows me that Ladd McConkey wants to be great. That's what great players do when you're young. If you have a person in there that you feel like can help you, ask them questions and get all that information you can. And now it's not just on the tablet, but in person as well.
And one man who's making Ladd McConkey great as well is the quarterback Justin Herbert, who I have to ask you about because there has been this narrative throughout the offseason. A lot of people discussing this, his record in playoff games, the fact that he's not had a playoff win, etc. What does that mean for his sort of legacy? And are we going to stop talking about that until it eventually happens? And can he be the person to lead the Chargers to a playoff win? From your experiences with Justin, just give us a bit of insight into what he's like as a character, as a leader on this team, through your conversations with him. And really, is that something that would fuel him? Is that something that would be in his mind going into the season as like a, I'm going to prove you all wrong sort of thing? Or is that not the type of character he is?
Yeah, so I've covered Justin since he was drafted in 2020. I've watched every single game that he's played live. And, I don't know if he's your, quintessential quarterback character. I think he's, a little bit quieter than a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen or even a Patrick Mahomes. He's got a little bit of a different personality. He's brilliant. Like, intellectually, he's very, very smart, and his football IQ is off the charts. And then you pair that with all of these physical tools, and you have the makings of a potentially elite quarterback. The playoff narrative is going to follow him, however, until he gets it done. He's been in 2 playoff games. The first one in Jacksonville that I was at, it's hard to put that entirely on his shoulders. They're up 27-0. He had one throw in that game where Keenan Allen was open in the end zone. He missed him in the first half. It would have put him ahead 34-0, and that might have been the nail in the coffin in the game. Outside of that, though, I thought he played a solid game. It was really the defense that collapsed. Now, you go to the second playoff game last year in Houston, that to me was the worst game he's ever played in his career. And I think the big thing with Justin Herbert, and this really was what happened in the Houston game, when the protection breaks down, when everything around him is falling, can he be that guy that creates? And you look at Josh Allen, you look at Lamar Jackson, you look at Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, and they get into these situations where everything around them is crumbling, but they make those plays and they take it on themselves and they create off script and they will the team to a victory. And in that Houston game, everything around Justin Herbert was crumbling, and he didn't step up in that way that these other quarterbacks do in those situations. So he was pressured on over 50% of his dropbacks in that game, which is a crazy, crazy number. He didn't scramble one time, not a single time. And so I think the step for him is when everything is crumbling around him, can he tap into that playmaking, which he has shown at numerous stages in his career? Can he tap into that and put the team on his shoulders and will the team and elevate the team in those situations where it isn't perfect around him? And that's the step that he has to take, is when those situations are happening, you're the quarterback, you're getting paid $52.5 million a year. You have to be that dude and put the team on your shoulders and create in a way that you've shown you're able to, but maybe haven't done consistently in the way that these other elite quarterbacks have done.
Yeah, it's interesting because I spoke to the Chargers fullback Scott Matlock the other day at the media availability, and I asked him about why people, we almost have these quarterback tiers of like elite level. Yeah. And I asked him, what is the reason here that we don't talk about, we talk about Justin Herbert as an elite quarterback, but he's not in that sort of top tier. His name always gets left out. Why is that? And Scott Matlock gave a very, a response to say, it's not really my job to say why that might be.
Like everybody's wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's wrong. You can say what you like. We're not listening, etc. But I think it's a really good point you make. It's about in those crucial moments, can you be the guy essentially that you're being paid to be and to put the game on your back? one man who's going to give him all the confidence in the world is the head coach, Jim Harbaugh, who is such an eccentric character.
Oh, yeah.
We love to hear from. The stories are phenomenal. He's been at this team for a year now. The transformation that we've seen within the Chargers since he took over from that 5-12 season to an 11-win season, they reached the playoffs. It felt like to many the Chargers really overachieved. So I just wanted to ask you about culture, because I think that's so important, especially within this team and what Jim Harbaugh's brought. What have you seen in the year that you've spent around the organization with Jim and him leading this team? How have you seen that develop?
Yeah, I mean, he's a master culture builder, and I'm fascinated by this idea of culture. I wrote about it a bunch last year because it's not just a sport thing, right? Everybody is trying to build culture. If you're, starting a business, you want to have culture, right? So I was so fascinated because he's done it everywhere he's been. And so what I did last season is I just spent the season tracking everything in a notebook. Every little piece of information that I felt like was related to building culture, I just tracked it over the entire season. And by the end of the season, I had this full notebook full of all of these moments. And what I realized is building culture is about the very specific individual moments, these small things that happen over the course of a season that reinforce your messaging and build this thing that we call culture. So some moments that I tracked and I ended up writing about. So they were in a team meeting on the eve of a game, and Jim Harbaugh walks in with a piece of paper and he stands up in front of the room and he starts reciting these lyrics to a Black Eyed Peas song. I've got a feeling.
Yeah.
You know that song?
Yeah.
I've got a feeling. So he's reading the words.
Right, okay.
Not singing, reading the words. And so the players are sitting there being like, what the heck is this? And then all of a sudden, all of the players realize that he's reading the lyrics to I've Got a Feeling by Black Eyed Peas. The entire room realizes. Somebody starts banging the table to a beat. The whole room starts singing. And as Jim is reading the lyrics, the whole team is standing up, singing the lyrics and dancing to I've Got a Feeling by Black Eyed Peas. And it's just like these kind of moments throughout the season where it's like, I think early on you see Jim Harbaugh and you're like, what is this guy? This guy is different than anybody that we've ever seen. But he's himself all of the time. And what players tap into and what they follow is the authenticity. And the fact that he is that weird guy all the time, and he's doing these things all the time. Another moment that I tracked in my notebook was these gifts that Jim Harbaugh would give to players. And he had every week he would pick like a dozen players, and they were like called heroes of the game, and he would give them a gift. But they were like the most insane gifts ever, like these blue collar gifts, like a pocket knife. And, like work boots.
Right, okay.
And before the playoff game, he gave every single player a back scratcher with their, like, name and number on it. And his whole messaging was, like, sometimes you have to scratch your own back. Like, sometimes no one's going to be there for you.
So
and
there's always a message.
Always a message. And so he walks into the team meeting. I got this story from Quentin Johnson, actually. He walks into the team meeting, and he reaches into his pants, not into his pocket, into the front of his pants, his trousers, and pulls out a back scratcher out of the front of his pants. And he goes, sometimes you got to scratch your own back. And he reaches it and starts scratching his own back. And all the players are like, but at that point, he built it up.
Yeah.
He'd been so authentic over the whole season that like they were like, hell yeah. And the whole team rallied around these back scratchers, and they all had them in their lockers before, they went into the Houston game. Obviously, that one didn't work. And there's going to be certain moments where, you have the result or not the result. But part of culture is sort of avoiding the results and diving into the process. And, man, he is one of one, and his authenticity is what really changed things for the Chargers last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to, we've spoken about the offensive side of the ball, and the last couple of questions from me, I wanted to sort of focus on the defense.
Yeah.
And especially, you lose notable veterans this year in Joey Bosa, in Poona Ford as well, and that's a massive loss in the defensive tackle position. How do you see this defense shaping out? Because I know you wrote a great piece recently about the defensive coordinator, Jesse Minter, and essentially being quite surprising that he didn't really have as many head coaching interviews, or there wasn't as much chatter about him in the most recent offseason about getting a head coaching job. How do you see this defense shaking out, from the unit it was last year where it allowed the fewest points in the league? Phenomenal unit. How do you see it improving in the second year of Jesse Minter?
Yeah, I mean, I believe in this defensive coordinator, man. So he didn't get a single head coaching interview last cycle. And,
why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think, for whatever reason, NFL owners gravitate towards the offensive genius and not the defensive genius. I think a lot of teams want that guy that can come in and take their quarterback who hasn't developed and turn him into something great. I mean, you look at what the Jaguars did, right? Liam Cohen builds that amazing offense in Tampa. They bring him in because they want to resurrect Trevor Lawrence, who's shown, a lot of potential, but maybe not hit the way that everyone thought he was going to hit when he was the number one overall pick. So there's a little bit of that to it. But you talk about coaching trees that have success, and everyone likes to talk about Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan. The Harbaughs have had a decent amount of success in football, and Jesse Minter is from the Harbaugh tree, and not just Jim Harbaugh, because he coached for John Harbaugh for 4 years with the Ravens. So I think this offseason, that was part of what I wrote in the piece, if they have another good year, I would fully expect him to get a bunch of head coaching interviews, because I believe he's going to be great, and there's certain attributes that I look for in a head coach, and one of them is humility, which I think Jesse Minter has and to a degree has learned from Jim Harbaugh, and your willingness to delegate, which is tied to your humility. Like, can you trust your assistant coaches to take on responsibility so that you can focus on the big picture stuff? I think he has all of that stuff. But in terms of the defense, like, I believe in him. He took a ragtag group last year, a group that they kind of pieced together. Obviously, they had the edge rushers with Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, but a bunch of guys that were basically cast-offs, Poona Ford and Christian Fulton, and turned this defense into a top 10 unit. And his vision for Derwin James, I think, has been absolutely brilliant, moving him into the nickel position and really, instead of moving him around to a bunch of different positions, allowing him to focus on this specific position and viewing versatility differently. I think you can look at versatility and be like, oh, he can play here. He can play dime. He can play nickel. He can play safety. He can play corner. He can do all these things. And instead viewing his versatility as, okay, if we isolate him at this one position, we can also take advantage of all of his skills, but allow him to have a little more clarity in terms of how fast he's playing and what he's doing. So I think as long as Jesse Minter is the defensive coordinator, they're going to be, in the conversation as a top 10 unit. They've added more depth to the unit this year. I think the big question on defense is who are going to be those stars. You have Khalil Mack, you have Derwin James. Who are those other guys on the defense that are going to step up and move into these star roles? One name I'll throw out there, Deion Henley.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
Great. Yeah, inside linebacker who had a great year last year, but maybe hasn't jumped onto people's radars because the counting stats weren't there. Didn't really, rack up sacks or interceptions or forced fumbles, all the things that people see on the Football Reference page.
Yeah.
He had opportunities for those, and coincidentally, one of those big plays last year was in Week 14 against the Chiefs. Late in that game, he had a chance to sack Patrick Mahomes and end the game. He misses the tackle. Yeah. Mahomes hits Kelsey, and they end up kicking a field goal to win it. So Deion Henley's a possibility as a guy that could emerge as one of those star players. They have depth at corner with Dante Jackson, Benjamin St. Juste, the two rookies, Cam Hart and Tareeb Still. And so I believe it's going to be a good unit. To be an elite unit, I think some of these guys that maybe are not on people's radars have to jump up and reach that level of Derwin James and Khalil Mack and be that type of star player.
Yeah, I really like that you mentioned Deion. We spoke with Deion on talkSPORT just before that Houston playoff wildcard game, and it was around the time of the Pro Bowl, and I remember him feeling slightly snubbed, in all honesty, that he wasn't really being recognised. And I think all of the chatter this offseason, quietly but surely, has been about, can we see a big step from him this year? And I think you're certainly right in that, Dan. But I wanted to finally round off about the competitiveness of this division, because right now there's, we saw how good the NFC North was last year, for example. But you look at the AFC West this year, and you look at, the Kansas City Chiefs win 15 games last season. Denver and what's being built in that team by Sean Payton, they reached the playoffs. Chargers reached the playoffs last year, and there's this optimism in year 2 of Harbaugh. And then you've got the Raiders, who bring in Pete Carroll, Geno Smith. It's a team where people are thinking maybe they could be like a sneaky wildcard playoff team. It's such a competitive division. How do you think that works out for the Chargers? Is that a slight fear looking at how competitive this division is and how tricky it is? Because when you assess a game like tonight, even though it's an international game, it's a home game, but we're in Sao Paulo, you can't really afford to slip up, can you?
Yeah, and they start the season with 3 of these teams, right? They go from here in Sao Paulo to on the road Monday night against the Raiders, and then they play at home against the Broncos. Here's the crazy part about the division. You have 3 Super Bowl champions as head coaches in the division, and the one that hasn't won a Super Bowl is the Chargers head coach, Jim Harbaugh. So that's how competitive it is. And I think for the last 3-4 years, it's felt like the Raiders were kind of a game that you were looking forward to on the schedule. Not anymore. They have a quarterback. They have a head coach. They bring in Ashton Genty in the first round, who, that tape in college, good Lord. So it's different. And it kind of ties into a broader idea about the Chargers schedule, where this is a difficult schedule. The Chargers won 11 games last year. They beat one playoff team, and that was the Broncos. They went 2-5 against playoff teams. This year they have 9 games against teams that made the playoffs in 2024. Last year they had the 5th easiest schedule in the league by opposing record. This year they have the 12th hardest schedule by 2024 opposing record. So the path to the playoffs is more difficult. And that starts with 6 divisional games. As you mentioned, I think the big question is, have they done enough with the roster to offset what will be a much more difficult schedule? And, well, tonight we'll find out if they did. It'll be the start against the Chiefs in Sao Paulo.
Absolutely. Finally from me, you mentioned there, game day tonight, Chargers-Chiefs. We spoke a little bit at the top about the offensive line. Is there something else you're looking out for key tonight that you're thinking maybe it might be who the starting corners are? You mentioned there's a lot of depth there. What is it that you're going to be keeping a firm eye on tonight for tonight's game?
Yeah, the corners are definitely one of them. I think for me, you mentioned Joey Bosa leaving in the offseason. The guy that's going to step up and be a starter in place of Joey Bosa is Tuli Tuipulotu, former second-round pick. I'm going to be watching him tonight because he had a really good training camp. I think for me, he's an elite run defender. Very, very stout, very physical in the run game. Where I want to see him take that step is as a pass rusher. And he's going to get the opportunity this year with Joey Bosa gone. So I look at the Chiefs roster and on offense, and I specifically say, okay, where's the weakness here? And it's probably the left side of the offensive line. They traded Joe Thuney, their all-pro guard. He's with the Bears now. They have Kingsley Suamataia, who's going to be playing left guard, and they have a rookie at left tackle, and Josh Simmons. Left tackle was a little bit of a black hole for the Chiefs last year with all these rotating pieces. So can the Chargers attack that left side of the line in known passing situations? And I think with Tuli Tuipulotu specifically, they feel like he can rush from the edge, and they also feel like he can rush from the interior. He's a versatile piece in that way. So in some of these known passing situations, get the 3 edge rushers on the field with Khalil Mack and Bud Dupree on the outside and Tuli Tuipulotu on the inside. And can he create havoc as an interior rusher? That is a position with Tuli that I'm watching this year to see if he can take that step and replace, who's a franchise legend in Joey Bosa.
I've just thought I can't let you go without finishing this without asking a Manchester United question.
Oh,
we spoke off air. You said that you're a Manchester United fan. This is your team.
Oh, no.
I have to ask you, of course, for talkSPORT. Give me your thoughts on Manchester United right now. What on earth is going on? What are your thoughts on Ruben Amorim? Give it to me.
I like Ruben Amorim. I think he's got a good head on his shoulders, and even though he's not super flexible in his system, I like what he brings as a manager. It's really hard to play soccer without a reliable goalkeeper. I was a goalkeeper growing up, and when you don't have that trust in your goalkeeper, especially on set pieces, when the keeper can come out and control the 18-yard box, which is the job of a keeper, it's really difficult to play good soccer or good football over in the UK. So hopefully this kid they brought in from Belgium, Lamens, can come in and maybe solidify the keeper spot, but I don't think they're going anywhere until they can find somebody that can play goalkeeper the way that David De Gea played and solidify that position. It's really, really hard to win games when you don't have that. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Final prediction then. How many games did the Chargers win this season, and where did Manchester United finish this season in the table? You got the double.
All right. I'm going to say Manchester United finished like 13th in the table, and I have the Chargers at 9-8. I just think the schedule is really difficult. I don't know if they've done enough on the interior of the offensive line to rectify that. I don't know if they can overcome the Rashawn Slater injury, and like I mentioned, they play 9 games against playoff teams. It's one after the other. It's Washington. It's the Eagles. And then you throw in teams that didn't even make the playoffs last year, like the Cowboys. And it's just a difficult schedule, and I think they're going to be battling all season. 9-8 will have them on the fringe and in the conversation late in the season, but I think it's going to be a little bit of a step back this year for the Chargers.
Really looking forward to seeing how it plays out tonight here in Sao Paulo. Daniel, an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for giving talkSPORT some of your time.
Thanks for having me, Will.